Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, June 4th, and we have two U.S. Women's National Team games to talk about. We might actually not get too deep into results. It was dominant from the team, but what players stood out, what players never really got a shot, what races are kind of ending, and where does the bubble stand for the U.S. as they go into the second half of the year of great roster experimentation? Let's dig in. So the U.S. Women's National Team played two games this week, and they went really well. Good international window for the U.S. They start with a 3-0 win over China with goals from Catarina Macario, Sam Coffey, and Lindsey Heaps. And then last night before we recorded, 4-0 win over Jamaica. Ali Sentnor and it scores a brace, and Lynn Biondolo scores a brace. These games were good. The U.S. dominated. We're not probably going to get into the nitty-gritty of any of these performances because, to be frank, the opponents were a little bit overmatched. I think we knew that going into this window. But there are still definitely takeaways to be gleaned here. And I think the messaging we're getting from Emma Hayes is that, yes, experimentation, but the clock is kind of ticking as we move through this year of this great roster revamp of, yes, they want to keep getting new looks and new faces, but the time will come, and it might be coming sooner rather than later, where they have kind of this core set, and you're going to be seeing more of a bubble rotate around that core, but that core is going to look different than the team that was in Paris last year. And so I think that's very interesting. And we are seeing great developments kind of with those players in this window as they were chasing, again, kind of physical teams playing in the low block. So in the spirit of roster evaluation, again, we're not going to get too granular about the results, but I just want to talk players. We're just talking players in, players out, what utilized well, showed off well, maybe players that didn't get to make their mark as much. And so let's start with some of my big takeaways of I was watching these games and I thought this player looks not only like they're making this roster because there are some obvious names in here, but that they're helping the team progress, and the team is getting better and solving problems in more interesting ways than they were at this time in the cycle, 3-4 years ago. And so I think I have to start with, again, one of the biggest names of all, probably the captain, Lindsey Heaps. Heaps takes a lot of criticism on this show. If you've ever listened or watched The Late Sub, you know that I am not afraid to say when I think that Heaps missed the mark. I want to be fair. I thought she was excellent in both of these games. I think Heaps is an incredible player to have on your team if you're trying to break lines, if you're going to be having the lion's share of the possession, if you're not getting pressed too much, if you're trying to break down that low block. I think Heaps is your player, and I do think she has that ability to really set the tone for the U.S. in games like this one. I think I've always said before that it's always I wish maybe she was used more situationally than kind of all the time. But in these games, she was excellent. The game against China, which I'm probably going to reference a lot because the game against Jamaica, I think, had one or two really interesting moments, but then it was a lot of second game of a friendly series against an overmatched opponent. But in this game against China, Heaps starts, and I like that, and I did say kind of going into this this window that I thought Heaps was probably going to be the most forward-facing midfielder, and that ended up being true. Catarina Macario was in front of her as sort of that false number 9. I do have concerns sometimes when the U.S. rolls this lineup out, which is interesting because I do think that is kind of Hayes's starting core right now, is that team we saw against China. I worry about having Sam Coffey and Heaps and Macario through this spine of the team. There's not a lot of pace there. There are sometimes mistakes in kind of turning the ball over. Sometimes they occupy the same spaces when they're supposed to be stretching teams. But I do think that Hayes also surrounded them with the right other pieces in this game to mix strengths together. I think obviously having Naomi Girma back, she's going to get referenced a lot. That changes everything for the U.S. They have their safety blanket back there in their starting center back. Lily Johannes had an excellent window. Alyssa Thompson was able to utilize pace. Michelle Cooper was able to utilize pace. The right pieces around Heaps, Macario, and Coffey. And I thought Heaps got herself into really good attacking spaces in both games. Genuinely, she came off the bench in the second game. But my biggest knock maybe is sometimes when she is sort of looking for those attacking spaces, she's the one with the ball at her feet taking the final shot when maybe you want somebody else doing that. Her hit rate internationally is not super high. That's maybe a coaching thing to work on, but I don't think you can fault the player for getting into the right areas. I was, again, concerned that she and Macario were going to be occupying the same spaces in this game against China, and that ended up not being true at all. She and Macario played off each other really, really well, as people know, former teammates at Lyon. And she did get enough finishing chances that she did get a goal in the first game. She's got a nice open header, which was generated, again, by her movement. And she also had one pass. She came off the bench kind of late in the game against Jamaica, but she had like one line-breaking pass that didn't ultimately end up in a goal, but it was a really nice moment where I'm like, yes, Lindsey Heaps has so much to give this team, but it is probably against teams like this where they're sitting back a little bit more. I don't love her against a press. I don't love her against a super, athletic, physical midfield. But these games, she really shines. And it was cool to see her movement kind of inspire the teammates around her to break those lines and get those shots off. Like I said, her finishing could use some work, and I'm not sure the US wants her to be the one probably finishing all of those chances, but really nice performance from Lindsey Heaps. Job well done. I liked what I saw from her in this window, which I think is interesting because, again, in 2 years, I think she is going to be one of those players in the conversation of like, what is her role? How big is her role? What does she bring to the team? I also want to talk about the goalkeeping race to succeed Alyssa Naeher. I think we have a clear front runner. We were mentioning this a little bit, talking roster, mentioning last international period, but Fallon Tullis-Joyce of Manchester United has really become the front runner. Hayes was like a little reticent to say it out loud. She said she had like some experience benefits and stuff like that, but Tullis-Joyce started both matches, which is huge. Hayes said that stemmed from wanting her to get time with Naomi Girma, which like relatable. But she is the front runner. She's getting multiple reps. If you are kind of turning that page with the US where it's more important that you get more time with some of the established starters, that is an indicator that things are going well. And I think we saw that a lot during this international period. I think this is the project the US should be spending time on. I think she has all the qualities of US Women's National Team starting goalkeeper. I think we did see against China some of the things she still has to work on. If you have heard me or anybody else talk about Fallon Tullis-Joyce, there's a lot of conversation about how she plays with the ball at her feet, which sometimes can be construed as like an attacking thing, right? Where it's, well, how does she look when they're trying to set the pace, when they're trying to play out the back, when they're trying to hit diagonal balls to break a team down? But it also comes down to decision making. And I do think that China tested her a little bit, especially early in that first game. They had a game plan of really making her uncomfortable with the ball at her feet. Tullis-Joyce honestly reminds me a lot of Alyssa Naeher in her first couple years with the U.S. Women's National Team. She is calm, she's organized, she's a good shot stopper, she's a great communicator. But she sometimes dropped back a few times against China on the break when she maybe should have come off her line faster. That was the Naeher special for a long time, which she really worked on and really improved. China specifically attacked her when she had the ball at her feet to try to get her into some of these touchy moments going back and forth with the central defense. It worked in that there were moments where Tullis-Joyce looked uncomfortable, but also it didn't work in that China did not score. I thought that Tullis-Joyce kind of absorbed that pressure, understood that game plan, and they got enough done to get the ball out and not have it become a major issue. I guess my concern is just that actually is less about Tullis-Joyce's ability to adapt to teams kind of pouncing on her, and just the fact that it's a known weakness that I do think that other teams, stronger teams, are going to game plan for. And so I think there's a twofold project here, which is how can Tullis-Joyce adapt to the speed of play, to the range of play, to what's being asked of her in these games, but also how can you build her up so that she doesn't become number one on the scouting report for other teams to go, if we can make her uncomfortable, we can really disrupt the US's possession and also maybe have them cough up a goal or two, right? Jamaica didn't give her much to do in the second game, but again, I think it's more the fact that she started both games that is significant. And then I think we saw the most from her against that China game. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of her going forward. I like it. I think if we're picking one, I think Tullis-Joyce is the way to go. I don't think that race is over by any means, but I like the track that Hayes is on at this moment. Moving on to some younger players that I don't think it's a surprise that they're in the mix, but I just thought really balled out. I think we got to talk about Lily Johannes, not a question mark, a coveted player by this team. It's more like they actually have to hold themselves back from just having her play full 90s constantly because she's so good. But man, I got to sing this kid's praises a little bit more because she is the freaking truth. Man, she started both games. Her physicality actually has really improved in just the last 6 months. I think you can see her kind of taking that role on of understanding that players are going to try to dig in a little bit. They're going to try to get her off her game. There's like a fistful of jersey in like the first 15 minutes of that China game, and she still got the pass off. I love that from Johannes. She got chippy a little bit actually sometimes against Jamaica when she gave up the ball. I was like, I like the edge. I like what we're seeing from the teenager. And she unlocked something that the U.S. has been criticized for a lot in the modern era of the team in talking about this particular window, which is breaking the low block. That first goal that she unlocked against Jamaica was insane. Jamaica was like, they were fine. They were like sitting in the 4 or 5 back. They're like, we're doing good. We're set. We're doing great. And in 3 touches, bam, bam, bam. The U.S. unlocks and they score. And before Jamaica can even, get their head back on straight, suddenly the ball's in the back of the net. Johannes sends this perfect diagonal ball, kind of mind melding and timing with Emily Fox, who slips in behind the back line. Fox one times it to Ali Sentnor, who one times it into the goal. It's not just that Johannes can see the plays emerging. We have seen the U.S., especially underlying backline players like Girma is a very good example. Like, they do have players who can see plays emerging, but the fact that the timing, the vision, and the execution was that good to unlock that defense like that, that is some of that really special stuff where you're seeing glimpses of what could become truly world-class play against the top teams in the world in a couple of years. And I want to shout out Sentnor, who finished that chance. The Jamaica game was a good example of why she's going to make herself really hard to drop. She wants, the kind of my whole thing with Sentnor, and I've mentioned her on this show before, but I think we are seeing kind of new shades of that, especially in that Jamaica game. She wants to score goals more than defenders want to defend, which is old. That's a very reductive way to put it, but she's kind of a classic U.S. player archetype in my brain. Maybe it is because she came out of that North Carolina program, that sort of old-fashioned, true blue, old-timey American program, but she's a dog, man. She runs hard. She defends physically. She has a willingness to shoot when the U.S. just needs to punch it in. Like, some of that Jamaica game, it felt like she was getting those looks just because she was the one willing to take the shot, or she was chasing the second ball. They were getting a lot of deflections off of the goalkeeper. I really like that. Sometimes, not to quote Vlatko Andonovsky, but you do need your artists and you do need your warriors. And I think that Sentnor is one of your classic warriors. And I really liked how she's kind of opening that up for herself. I also think Sentnor has a really interesting opportunity because she is operating in a space where she's very, very different than Macario. And so she can kind of carve out, and there is room for this. I think I mentioned this last week, saying that Mia Fischel could be another player that could fill this role, but there is room for her to become a very different type of center forward than some of the other players they have on this roster. The U.S. is deep on the wings. We know this, right? Like, depth after depth after depth. Alyssa Thompson was one of the best players, probably the best player for the U.S. over 2 games. And that is a player that is like on top of what we know Triple Espresso could do last year. The wings are very, very deep position. But if you can carve something out, I think you put Limby and Dolo in this list too, carve something out in the middle, in the center section of the pitch, become that target, become that person who's going to chase the deflection, who's going to take the long shot. She's very good at scoring from distance. She has a shot here to actually make a huge impact. And I think her age works in her favor. And again, her willingness to kind of do it all, and the fact that she is really tenacious defensively as well. I think there was always a question about her technical ability as kind of an evolving young player. Again, that one time against Jamaica was pretty damn good, though. So we'll just have to see kind of how that continues to progress. But I do think that was a real performance from Ali Sentnor that could make a difference down the line when Hayes is making some difficult roster decisions. Another similar player that I thought had a really good window, maybe more quietly, was Michelle Cooper out of Kansas City. She started that first game and she had an assist. Michelle Cooper is a player that kind of had all of the pieces. She came out of college. She's very athletic. She's got a good eye for goal, but like the finishing maybe wasn't quite there, or the passing ability wasn't quite there. And it was just kind of waiting for her to put all the pieces together to become a more technical footballer, as opposed to maybe just sort of that really talented all around athlete. And I think we have seen that consistently from Cooper over the last year for club and for country. And again, just making herself quietly really difficult to drop. Played really well with Alyssa Thompson, who is not going to be one of my featured players here because I do think it's almost too obvious. And we've talked about her a lot on this show, but another incredible international window from her. I thought that she figured how her spacing nicely with Kat Macario. And I want to shout Macario out too. If she can get her game load back up, she started both games really exciting. But like, I think Cooper getting a nice amount of field time as one of those bubble players, a hard worker, great motor, but who's refining her game, kind of in the same way we're seeing Thompson refine her game. She could become a really useful pass-first winger for them. I don't know if she's ever going to be this great scoring ability for the United States at the international level, but again, prove me wrong as she keeps progressing. God knows what she could do. But in the way we even saw Trinity Rodman sometimes tuck in those early stages of her international career and become really pass first, and that's how she kind of wove her way into the team before starting to take more of those shots. I think Cooper can follow that same game plan. I think that the next step for her was getting a little bit more playing time with these other players who were connecting so well, and she made an impact. Again, Cooper, going to be hard to drop when some other names come back. So let's talk about that in the big picture, maybe the missed opportunities of what are still question marks as we go into the next international break, as we go into the end of the year, as we go into we're already there, right? It's June. What happens when we are looking at 2026 and things start to get a little more serious? Are there still things that they're going to wish they could have done in windows like this one to figure out exactly who these right combinations are? So here are some of my missed opportunities. One was I thought the center back pairings were a little lackluster. Obviously, it was wonderful to get Naomi Girma back. She was basically perfect against China and Jamaica. The team is completely different with her on the pitch. They are calmer. They make fewer mistakes. God, what a gift to your inexperienced goalkeeper to have Naomi Girma on the pitch with you. But there's still a little bit of rigidity to figuring out partnerships with Girma. It was her and Emily Sonnet in the China game. I thought that was a missed opportunity with the understanding that China was probably going to be the better opponent of the two in this window. I don't know if it's a lack of trust, if it was wanting, again, kind of that 1A lineup for the first game of the international break. It's probably a little bit of that, working Girma back in. But we know Sonnet. We know what Sonnet can do. And I guess maybe what I'm struggling with is I don't think Sonnet's getting dropped anytime soon. She's an incredibly versatile player who can play anywhere on the pitch, and she's only actually improved with every year she's been a professional. But I just question if she is the starting the starting center back next to Girma once they have, again, that 1A lineup back. So do you not want to test more depth? Sams, Mickey Owen. I'm not saying I even think that those players would look amazing in a game like this, but it just feels like a wasted opportunity with so many other center back injuries. Obviously, Davidson is not here because of a serious injury. Mickey Owen did get the start with Girma against Jamaica, but that almost underlined the issue for me, which is that there wasn't much to analyze in that game by way of a defensive performance. So that 2-game window maybe really becomes one. And I felt like it was a missed opportunity to get some new names in beside Girma to really test kind of who can step up. And let's call it like that third or fourth center back spot if you are putting a full 23 together for a World Cup. I thought the set pieces also were still a little rough. They did score on a corner kick against Jamaica, so they're proving me wrong. Lindsey and Dolo is out here to prove me wrong, but I think the corner kicks are still a little bit rough. Against China, it felt almost as likely that the team would have to defend a counter off a corner as it was that they actually would punch it into the back of the net. So that part is still really not clicking, not to, kind of crib from other pundits, but it's not important in games like this that the corner kicks look perfect, but you do just kind of have to wonder, they're really focusing on short corners, which is a lack of confidence in their corner kick delivery. I just don't know if it's all completely working, and they do still have time, but when you are seeing other progress from the team, you do want that part also to start to vibe a little bit more. So I'm just curious, I guess, on how the U.S. is going to continue approaching that, because no, they don't need set pieces now, but they will once they're back into a major international tournament. And then also just, I thought some of the missed opportunities were maybe in the subbing patterns, going back to what I was saying about the center backs. That was about starters, but I think Hayes had to be of two minds in this window more than we even probably anticipated. There was less rotation from game 1 to game 2 than I thought there was going to be. You also saw maybe just some forced rotation because Emily Fox was clearly not, she was way too tired to be able to play that first game against China. So she plays the second game against Jamaica, but that's one of your starters, right? So I guess I just don't know how much we learned about some of these late subs. Hello, late sub. How do you set those expectations when you're also trying to build chemistry with the starting group? Hayes was actually fairly critical of the substitutes after the first game. She says that the level can't drop when we start making a lot of changes, but it's kind of inherent to sort of these heavy score lines. And so I did feel like, unfortunately, there are some, I'll talk about the positives of Hayes' approach to close, but unfortunately, I thought some of these players that got kind of thrown in later in these 2 games didn't have a ton of time to really stand out, didn't really have a chance to build chemistry with anybody. And it's a sink or swim proposition. I mean, you see a player like Biandolo come in, score 2 goals off the bench. You're like, that's the gold standard. But not everyone is Lynn Biandolo. And especially in the midfield where it is all about those connections. Again, I thought Lola Bonta did everything that she could, but there wasn't a lot of serious playing time there, or really the ability to kind of get, stuck in and make an impact. I think Olivia Moultrie found herself in a similar position. Emily Sams, I think there's some of these players, like maybe the answers are getting made in training and we just kind of have to accept that. But I did think that these sub patterns for both games, despite the fact that they were winning by so much and things were going so well, just didn't quite have the focus that I'm sure Hayes was looking for. And I also think, going back to these 2 minds that I think Hayes was maybe on, the midfield in particular, and this is maybe my thesis on bubble players in general, including the 2 notable names that we talked about last week that were with the U23s and weren't in this camp at all. Hayes doesn't just need to refresh the midfield or make it younger. She needs that group to improve. significantly from where they've been to the last couple of years. Yes, they're getting younger, but they're getting younger while she's also having to raise the standard for the starting group significantly. And as I was saying last week, I think significantly from like the gold medal match in 2024. This is a progress. This is a project of progress in addition to a project of revamping and getting younger. And they've made that progress. We're seeing these players step up and succeed. Like I said, Heaps had a great window. Johannes is the freaking truth. Claire Hutton, I think, is in that mix very, very seriously. I think Sam Coffey is really being trusted with the right pieces around her to be that starting number 6. And I think she's doing a very nice job. But there's not much room if you aren't already on that wavelength, because she needs to kind of make some decisions there, because that team has, or that part of the team has to continue to get better in addition to just get younger. There are other players coming back from injury that I think are going to get considered, right? You got Corey Bethune coming back from injury. I know there's a lot of hope that Hal Hirschfeld will find her way back into the mix. But I do think, and this is kind of my final big thought coming out of this window, is the roster is closer to this 2025 version of set than it maybe felt going into this camp. This isn't really a thesis on who's going to be starting in 2027. Like, I have no idea, and I don't think they do either, what's going to happen in 2 years. But we're starting to see players get multiple starts, get extended time in. We're in a good part of the year where everyone is either finishing a club season or in the middle of one, so everyone's played in fitness-wise, unless you're coming back from injury. And I think those are the players to look at. Those are the players to take seriously as the future of this program. I worry that the players that kind of got dumped into games late never really had a chance, which is, this happens at times when they're starting to ramp up. And so what does a ramp up mean in 2025? I don't know, but I do think we're starting to see shades of it, because Hayes is being very purposeful with what she wants to see from her starters and what she wants to see from her bench. And there is an increasing gap between those two groups. And I think we saw that this week. So the competition rises next international break. They play 2 games against Ireland, 1 game against Canada. I cannot wait to see how it goes. Would not be surprised if everyone we saw start these 2 games makes it in. Really curious to see if any of those U23s make it back up, or if any of these late subs did just enough in training to get a second look. But love watching these games, love talking this process. Can't wait to see what happens next. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.